Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
Dan, welcome back to another beautiful Tuesday evening. How you doing?
Hey, doing good.
We were talking before we jumped on here. Awfully cold in my area. How's the weather treating you in Wisconsin?
Next to you, it's pretty warm right now, and I think it's about. I think it's actually above zero right now. I think they're like 2 or 3 degrees out. I think I saw that in the thermometer, which is exciting. It's been under zero. Yesterday was minus, or this morning was like minus 16 or something. I don't know, something like that. Minus something in double digits when I went to work.
Yeah,
but it has got the deer moving quite well. And it amazes me that nobody hunts at this time of the year. You don't see anybody out there. Now I'm tagged out on bucks, so I haven't. I almost went hunted today because the last 2 days in a row I've had deer quite early in my backyard food plot, and I do have doe tags. And not that I really need another deer, but when I just have to walk out back, it's kind of fun to get one in the late season. Dressed all in white, hiding in the snow. I don't know, but I don't know. Carol talked me into snuggling up with her and watching TV, and then I watched them on the phone instead. They were out there feeding away.
This is the time of year to get back in the good graces of your significant other, so maybe that was a good move, Dan.
Yeah, I don't hate those deer that much, anyways. But if I had a buck tag, there's a lot of bucks moving real early right now. They're starting to drop their antlers, though. I seen one that had antlers missing. I'm not sure which one it was, but it is a really, really good time to hunt. I mean, people don't get that. Right now is the most patternable time for deer in the North Country. When you get a good amount of snowfall and you get really cold temps, those things get locked on a food pattern and they start moving in daylight quite often because they can't just sit still. They freeze to death. They can't wait to get to that food. That's what warms them up when they fill their stomach up and churn that around. I mean, late season is an awesome time to kill big bucks. And I've killed a few in late season. Matter of fact, I killed one 5 years ago on the 14th of January. I know that because it just came up on my Facebook memories.
Yeah, it's good for a few things. Not many, but a few things.
On the 14th of January, I shot a really nice buck 5 years ago. Late season on one of them patterns. Good time to hunt. If you guys got a buck tag and you're sitting around the house moping, buy some warm weather gear and get your butt out there.
Yeah. So Dan, we talked about buck bedding 2 episodes ago before we had Barry Wenzel on, and thanks for everyone that tuned in. I think Barry appreciated that episode, went over real well and got a lot of positive feedback. So it's nice to have Barry on, but we went through a bunch of topics that 2 weeks ago and we didn't get through all of them. So we wanted to come back because obviously bedding, that's the bread and butter of the hunting beast. And this is a great time of year to start thinking about your strategy going into spring for scouting new properties and things you want to get better at. So let's kick it off with something you've talked about before, but it's a good topic to revisit, and that's the safety zone. So talk to me about what the safety zone is and how you use that when you're looking at beds and planning your setups.
The safe zone. What I consider the safe zone is if you think about where a bedding area is, where all the beds are in there. If a buck's laying in there and he's laying there for a reason, he can smell from one direction, he can see another, or he can hear somebody coming from a certain distance. And there's an area around that bed, an imaginary circle. It might not be round, but there's a circle around his bed that I would say that buck feels like he knows if somebody invades. That's why he's bedding there, because it's safe, right? So within that zone, he feels he can move around all day long and feel safe. You watch them from a distance, they'll get up comfortably, move around in their feet around, and they go kind of slow. And where they really hesitate is when they get to the edge of that zone, in my opinion, from my observation. When they get to the edge of where they can see, where they can hear, where they can smell. And what I want to do is I want to sit just outside that circle. Because if you get into it, he's going to hear, smell, or see you, right?
Right.
So you want to be just outside of his sight, smell, and sound on the trail leading from that bedding, up against the edge of that safe zone. And there might be several trails that come out of that safe zone, and each one is a spot to hunt. And that's how I kind of hunt a bedding area. Some areas they can see, 100 yards, and that extends that circle to 100 yards. And maybe they don't quite get that 100 yards. Maybe they do. They're going to feel comfortable going to where they can see, or they're going to feel comfortable going to where they can smell. Or if they know if something came in there, they'd hear it. They'll be comfortable going to that position. It's the going beyond into the unknown. It's kind of like walking out into darkness. You feel perfectly fine in your house. Think about when you're a kid. I guess when you get older, you kind of lose those fears. But when you're a kid, if you walked out the door into the darkness, how you were scared, you couldn't wait to get back into the house. But sometimes you had to go out for the bus or to go to school or, to do something, to get the mail for your mom or something. But you had to go outside. And that was a scary situation. Well, that's what these deer have. They have a scary situation when they get to a place where they can't trust it. So the safe zone is that imaginary circle around the bed.
And what do you think dictates how big that circle is? I know you talked about maybe the terrain, like obviously in hardwoods, maybe it's a little bigger because they can see a little farther, or in the marsh, it's a little smaller. What do you think other factors are that determine, by terrain?
I think it all has to do with sight, sound, and smell. In certain areas it's going to be bigger, certain areas it's going to be smaller. Thicker terrains. Like one of the reasons I really like swamp hunting is because that safe zone is so small. I can really creep it. You know what I mean? A lot of times I'm getting within 75 yards of those beds. That's the one thing that shocks people when they come on the workshop is how close I get to the beds, when they actually get to see that distance and how close we creep it. They're always shocked. I mean, you talk about it, but until you see it physically, I guess it's hard to explain. I'm really creeping them. I'm going up to that position. But the thing is, you can only do that if you know where the beds are. So that's where your spring scouting comes in play. So if you don't know where those beds are and you're guessing, you might want to stay back a little bit. But I think if you do enough spring scouting, you get pretty good at predicting where those beds are going to be, and you can creep it a little further because those beds seem to repeat themselves in the exact same kind of positions on every point, on every island, on every, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You've looked at enough of it that you know that. So you can kind of start predicting that stuff in places you haven't been, that repeat places you've been.
And Dan, real quick, while you mentioned it, just jog my memory. Speaking of the workshops, we talked about that a few weeks ago too, and you open those up. What's the status on those right now while we're talking about it?
I filled up both spots in March, and I filled up the first day, which was a Saturday, and first Saturday in February. The Sunday after the first day has a lot of openings, but the other three are all full.
Okay.
So that first Sunday, we still have openings. And that might actually be a good one because we've only got about, for whatever reason, everybody gravitated to the other ones. And we've only got about 8 people in that one. So that would probably be a good one because we'll probably only have it about half or 3/4 full by the time the workshop comes up, which I like the smaller ones. But I like lots of conversation. Conversations really get those things going. And it's weird because a lot of times if you get a lot of people are shy about talking. You really got to get them to open up. But sometimes you get a group that just talks really well. Every group's kind of different.
Well, don't be shy, folks. And if people still want to get in that last one that's open, still email you. Is that the best way?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We might do one for Hill Country yet too. I'm working on that. But I really want to look at the property when there's no snow, or at least after the snow has been sitting there for a long time before I commit. Because what we're going to do is we're going to go up by his name's on the tip of the big bear hunter up in western Wisconsin. We'll go up by his property, but the property changed from the last time I was up there. Last time we were on his property and his neighbors. Now he bought an adjoining property that looks really good. We want to look at that.
Is that Mike Foss, or is that the other guy?
It's the other guy.
Okay.
He's the guy that sells all the bait in Wisconsin.
Yeah. Mike's in Minnesota, right? Mike Foss.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike doesn't do much of any of that anymore. I don't think he guides, and he doesn't sell bait or anything like that.
Let's talk.
I don't know. I can't remember what his name is for the life of me.
And I'm not as a big a bear hunter as you, so I'm not in the loop as much on that. But let's talk about maybe some bed manipulation. So 2 or 3 things here. When would you block a bed? Would you ever do that? When would you create a bed? And when would you bump a bed on purpose? So let's talk about blocking, creating, and bumping.
Let's break those into pieces. So creating beds, I find that really fascinating. I think that can work, but it's really a critical science. People don't get it. I mean, I go and I kind of quit doing it. It just got overwhelming. I mean, everybody wanted me to go look at their properties, and it got a little hard to handle. But a lot of the types of people that would call me when I used to look at properties were people that called all the people that go look at properties. So they'd have the so-called pros have been there before me. And I'm not going to name anybody. I don't want to embarrass anybody or anything. But you get in there, and I've had people show me beds that they created, and you just scratch your head because they don't have any relevance to the wind or the thermal tunnel, or, and really, when you look at how a deer beds, I mean, if you guys watched the last couple of videos I did, on one of the videos, I talked about how these bucks go into, and I showed the tracks of one doing it, go from bed to bed to bed and smell the wind currents and everything else to make sure it's okay before they sit there. And if you watch them or you track them in snow, you'll see that. They'll go into a bed area and they'll check all the different beds until they find the spot that they need to be there for the wind currents and everything of that day. And I know one thing, me and you cannot smell like a deer.
Yeah.
So creating that bed is a very difficult task. I think people could make a high spot in a marsh with pallets and cover it with cattails of grass or something, and they could create something and it might work. But it's a lot of work for something that might work. I don't think you can guarantee any of that. You could cut flats in a hillside, but if you ever watch a deer bed on a hillside, it better be in the, if it's a steep hill, it better be in the exact position. And if it's a rounded hill, they're just going to move constantly anyways. They're not going to use a flat because they're constantly moving based on the wind currents. So creating beds is something that is almost impossible. Now, when I say that, take that with a grain of salt, because the beds that I've looked at that people have created, deer use them all the time. And that's why these people keep telling people to make them there. Make a bed here, do this, do that, because deer do use them. Remember, I'm referring to mature bucks. I'm not referring to deer. I can show you 1,000 bedding areas in the marsh behind my house that get bedded all the time that you could hunt and kill deer on a consistent basis. But maybe 10 of those hold mature bucks. Mature bucks are a whole different animal. They bed for specific reasons, and they're very picky by the time they get to be 5 or 6 or older about exactly where they bed and why. Where younger deer are more sloppy. They make more mistakes. They bed in places for the wrong winds. Even mature bucks make mistakes, but not nearly as much as the young ones. And to create bedding for mature bucks, you're taking on a monumental task that I think people like to, claim they can make them and believe they can make them. And maybe in a situation like a private managed farm where there's so many big bucks you can't help it, you can get some to bed there. But to do that in small acreage properties is pretty tough. To do that in pressured areas is pretty tough. So that's my take on making beds. You can do it. You might have success, but I think you're most likely to fail. And I think it's real easy to waste a lot of time doing that. That could be better spent. And it kind of, even if it worked, which it don't, but if it did, it'd take kind of the fun of the hunt out of it for me. I mean, everybody hunts for different reasons, so I don't want to say it would take your fun out or somebody else's. Because some people, their fun is making food plots and getting deer to come to them and creating an area where they can farm deer, right?
Right.
That's not my cup of tea. My cup of tea is the chess game. It's the get inside that buck's head, knowing where he is, and just planning a hunt or two here or there. Always thinking about the next move, thinking about where he could be, scouting and finding his home, not trying to create his home, not trying to entrap him, not trying to call him in, not trying to use scents or lures to trick him, which I think is pretty difficult because the deer doesn't get that old without having hit some of that stuff. And I do think there is some excitement when you call one in or something. But to me, my cup of tea is the whole outsmarting him. That buck never seen it coming. He just walks out like he does every day. But that day you're there. And he doesn't know it because he's never smelt you there before or anything else. And if he did, was one day in spring when he walked through there,
Yeah.
It wasn't any time around when he's living there. So that's my thing. The creating beds thing. I've looked at it real close, and I don't think it can be done effectively enough to bother with.
Well, Dan, if you have ever been on the internet, according to them, all you got to do is let out a bunch of those Mylar balloons and they'll land in the perfect spot, and then you can just make buck beds there. That's a popular theory these days.
That is a popular theory. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the opposite. Instead of creating, let's talk about blocking a natural bed off. Have you, or would you ever do that? And if so, why?
Yeah, I would do that, and I have done that. Because sometimes there's beds and situations where you have to be much further back. So shrinking that safe zone of where they can bed to make them go more towards the interior can be a good thing. If it were private land and you can plant something to block the eyesight, that's not a bad idea. But actually blocking them, all you have to do, is throw a branch across the bed. Matter of fact, quite the opposite. I used to play around with the blocking a lot more when I was younger. Nowadays, again, it's part of the chess game for me. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, should do it. I am saying it does kind of work. But I used to do it more than I do now. And I kind of do the opposite sometimes. If you go into a good bedding area and the best bed's got a giant branch in there that a deer can't move out of it, I'll move the branch for him, or if something lands there, it'll change the dynamics of a bedding area, but just moving that branch can bring it back. Keep in mind though, most bedding areas don't have one bed. There are some rare exceptions, but the overall majority of buck bedding areas that we hunt, have 5, 10, 15 beds, possibly more. Some of your primary bedding areas, the beds are countless. You might have 75 of them in an acre spot where they shift around. But you'll see that some of them that are in the perfect positions will be more worn, will be, you can tell they're better, more used. And a lot of times when they got a lot of beds, like I just said, like 75 and a quarter acre, a lot of those beds are satellite beds out to the sides where a buck goes in there, beds, and a more dominant buck comes in. He's got to move off to the edge someplace. He can't be next to him. If it gets too close to rut, he might not even be able to bed in that bedding area. But you'll get more than one deer in those bedding areas sometimes. But bucks will tend to, push away from each other if it's getting anywhere close to breeding, or which is pretty much as soon as they got hard antlers, they start kind of settling,
Yeah, and I think we talked about it a little bit 2 weeks ago, and some people had brought up in the question and answer, what if I got a buck bedded in an area where I can't get to him or I can't hunt him effectively? And I think that's the first thing that pops into my head is if there's absolutely no way you can make a hunt work on a certain area, then that might be the type of area you want to look at blocking off. But outside of that, I don't know. Sounds like you're not a big fan.
That's the thing though, too. If you're blocking the bed so he doesn't bed in that bedding area, that's almost impossible. Because like I said, there's almost always other beds right around there. Sometimes you won't even be able to tell where all the beds are. And in some terrains, you get down south, you'll have really good bedding areas, thick, areas that have really good bedding, but you can't see the beds. People will tell you, oh, they bed random here. They don't bed random anywhere, but you might not be able to see all the beds. So A better thing than blocking those beds, if you don't want that buck to bed there, is just to walk through there every couple of weeks. Just walk right through the bedding area, walk around in there. Your scent and you walking in there and you being in there, it will do way more and last way longer than a stick thrown in the bed. You can block a specific bed because that bed can see your position or see your access. But I think trying to block a bedding area by blocking beds, that's not, I mean, there might be a situation or two where you can do it, but not very many. It's not very feasible.
Well, then that kind of leads into another thing that was on the list here, bumping beds on purpose. And you talked about, maybe instead of blocking it, bump it on purpose. So give me a couple of examples, or maybe an example of a past hunt where you've had to do that, bump a buck out of a area 1, 2, 3 times to get them into an area that you thought set up better for hunting.
Well, there's one island I hunt where I shot the white doe there. I shot Jamie shot a really big buck there. My kid Jamie, we never found it though. And man, I know I've shot some other bucks there. I just can't think of which ones. But I shot a buck late winter there, January once. But I've passed many bucks. A really big 6-pointer once that I probably should have shot. And seen many other bucks. And that whole thing, that bedding area, what I would do is that island was in a smaller swamp area that was completely surrounded in a circle by roads and grass, and had brushy trees around the whole outskirts of this marsh bowl in the center. And there's an island in the middle of it. And that island you got to get wet to get to. And the bedding on the outskirts is not that great, all the way to that whole rim, but there is dogwood and there's little points and stuff like that. And there's nothing that really stands out. You get in there and there's 5 beds here, 5 beds there. Oh, there's a good rub in this one, a good rub in that one. But you drive yourself nuts hunting all of those. You know, and in some situations you might, like say that island ain't in the middle, if you knew there was a really good buck in there. But the island has some really pristine bedding on one point, the downwind side of it. And if you get any kind of angle on that wind, I mean, it could be a great spot to hunt. And what I found out was when pheasant hunting would open and the DNR would come and dump the whole grassland around the outside with pheasants, that brush line along the edge of the cattails was so thin that held the deer that when people would go along that, I'd find that island would suddenly, it was always a good spot to hunt. It always had a primary bedding area on there, but it would get way better. There'd be more deer in there. There would be more chances of big bucks. And I started mimicking that outside of pheasant season to see what would happen. So, and part of the reason is that is people started figuring it out and getting in there in late October and early November. And then you had competition. But early season, I had it to myself. So I started trying to, instead of waiting until mid-October pheasant opener, going in there and create pheasant opening. Just after work on a non-hunt day, go in there and walk that edge right along the cattails. You know all the bedding that's on the perimeter is going to be right on the cattail edge, right on the water edge. So you just walk that, kick deer. Sometimes you hear them, sometimes you don't. Walk that. But you don't just walk it once, because a lot of deer will bump, wait till you pass by and come back. Especially if they're used to pheasant hunters or bird hunters or small game hunters, because often those people just walk past. What they'll do is just move out of the way and move back, and they get used to getting like bumping and coming right back after you leave, like wait until you're gone, or they'll just come back the next day. But if they get bumped several times in a row, they start getting the picture and they move to more secure bedding. So the best thing you can do is bump those beds 2 or 3 days in a row, and not just bump them, but get your scent in there right on that transition. Walk that water edge, so you're real close to the beds, so your scent's right there bothering them, and walk that whole perimeter. And when I would do that, I would see probably triple the deer I'd see when I don't do that. You know, instead of seeing 1 or 2, 2 deer come out of there, 3 over here, 2 over there. You start seeing way more numbers on the hunts that I did were days prior. And I don't like to do it like the day before. which is probably what people are thinking. You know, I like to do it a couple days before so the deer get in there and get settled down so that they're not all spooky and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good tip. Yeah. Let's talk about something else that comes up a lot when we're talking about bedding areas is if I'm scouting these bedding areas, am I causing damage? And I think that area or that answer is probably going to vary on how close you're scouting. So talk to me about your theory there. Obviously, you do a lot of spring scouting, so I think that's going to be safe. But how late into the year will you scout, and how often before you think you start to cause damage?
I would say anytime you go into a bedding area, you're damaging it. Anytime. However, with that said, going into the spring is a lot safer. Now, to some degree, some of the spots you look at in the spring, maybe most of them, you probably are doing zero damage because the deer aren't even there. In a lot of cases, those deer aren't even bedding where we're looking. And a lot of people don't get that. They're like, oh, I'm going to go in there now and kick these deer out of there. You're not kicking deer out of there. In a lot of cases, they're not bedded there. They're migrating to different areas, you know, in winter and spring. And then coming back in, you know, summer, fall, or whatever. Remember when I say, you know, these bucks got peak bedding or peak time frames of 2 or 3 weeks when they bed in a spot. It's not all year. You know, they might bed in spots, some primary spots where they come in there periodically year round. Getting your scent in there does affect them. But scouting now, and you're not looking for now a sign. That's why a lot of people are like from down south, be like, oh, I wish I had snow. I could see the beds and see exactly where they're bedding. Not really, because where they're bedding right now is not where they're bedding in the fall. You know, now is a survival time, and they're bedding right on top of food, or they're moving those beds into secure high stem counts. It ain't the same as fall.
Yeah, especially getting the northern part of the Midwest where you know, northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, some of the Dakotas, you get some yarding behavior. And yeah, if you see the beds right now, it's like those could be deer from 2, 3, 5, 10 miles away.
Right. So now where you get a little bit of a problem is if you try start scouting in summer or you start getting into fall close to bedding. But anytime you scout a bedding area, you're doing damage. And I'll get a lot of hell from people for touching rubs when I'm out there looking at them. I'll touch them and look at them. And they'll be like, you never touch a rub. You get your scent on her. You don't think that deer smells your scent all around that rub? Those people are living on cloud 9. Just being in there gets your scent there. You've already done the damage. No matter how much scent free those people think they are, they're not. That deer knows you were there. So what I do is I go in, I get the intel I need, and I get out. I don't want to go day after day. I don't want to go back and say, okay, now today I'm going to figure out what tree. I go in, I figure out the tree, I figure out the system, I figure out where they're moving, I make my notes, I mark my spots, I mark my trail in and out, and I get out one day. I don't want to come back. I come back when it's kill time. And I'll scout all through the summer to some degree. And some of those bedding areas they're in the summer, some of them they're not. Bumping a deer months before you hunt can do some damage. I've seen where you bump a deer out of a bedding area. A lot of times, big bucks that I hunt, you get a crack at them in a bedding area, and you never see him in that bedding area again, even though you knew he lived there. Some of them do come back. But a lot of times, if you bump a deer wrong in a bedding area, he no longer feels safe there, especially mature bucks. And you might be able to just write that spot off. So you do have to be a little bit careful about, you know, going in there or how much you go in there and how close to season. So now when we scout in season, it's a whole different ballgame. We're going about it in a different method. You know, in spring and early summer, we're actually trying to look at the beds. And kind of that doesn't really go into summer very much because grass will grow up in them and stuff, and you stop being able to see them, right? But as long as you can see the matted area from last fall, you can scout beds. And then that's a whole different ball game when you get into season. You do not want to go walk entire woods and learn them before you go in and hunt them during season. What you want to do is map them out, look at where you think bedding is. You know, if you're going to hunt a spot that's not scouted, right?
Right.
Or if you have spots that are scouted and you're going to add additional spots because now you want to hunt a little more, you're pretty sure there's something living in there that you want to know more about the bedding areas. Do not go in and scout them. The time you scout them is if you're suspicious that that's a good spot. When you got the wind and stuff, you follow the deer trails back until you get into the point where you believe you're at the edge of that safe zone. And you set up and you wait for that buck and you hunt them that day. And usually what I do is if I'm going to do hunting like that, I try not to just focus on one spot. I focus on several. And I might go to the spot that I like the most and go in there. And I might get there and the sign don't look all that great. And I decide to back out, or I run into a tree stand, or I run into a giant truckload size of corn or 14 cell cams or whatever. I'll back out, go to plan B, then go to plan C. So sometimes I'll do that. I don't even have a stand. I just go for a walk, dressed like a normal person, or my flannels and stuff, so I'm not wearing camo. And I'll walk out and I'll walk into those spots. I'll probably wait till about 10 in the morning, go walk into several of those spots, look at them, back out, and go back to the one that I want to hunt. And then hunt that one the same day, but I'll go in the same way that I scouted in. And once I find a spot that I think I'm going to hunt, and I'm hunting a certain deer in an animal or a certain animal in the woods, and I find a spot, and I think, well, this looks like it could use a hunt. Even if I think I could probably find something better, if I think it needs a hunt, I'm hunting it. I'm not looking at any of the spots. I'm done looking. Even if I started at 11 and I've got till 2 before I got to be in a tree, I'm not scouting any further, because you get your scent in these spots and you screw them up. You can't just go dump your scent all over the woods. You have to be efficient about how you do it, which is why you have to find those overlooked spots. Everybody says there's no more overlooked spots. There's no more overlooked bedding. There's no more spots. Everybody's figured all this out. Hogwash. That is not true. If it were true, everybody would kill every big buck out there and there'd be no big bucks, period. And there are some properties that are like that. And you got to look at the sign and move on, right? Yeah. But if there's sign of a big buck and there's a big buck living in there, there's something people are missing. And it's your job as a detective hunter to figure it out. What are they missing? If there's good hunters in there that are decent, they're going to hit all the points. They're going to hit all the islands. They're going to hit, they're going to hit certain land features. And there's going to be something there that's not quite as obvious where that deer's going to be. And that's where I come in is I get good at figuring that out. And actually, regardless to what people say and what they think and all the internet chatter, and the popular thing right now is to say that all the YouTubers are ruining hunting. They're bringing too many people into these properties. They're ruining and wrecking them. The more pressure you put on these properties, the easier of a time I have, because there's only so many places left those deer can go.
Yeah. And Dan, you made a good point there talking about scouting with a stand on your back. And I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot is when you have the stand on your back, you're not doing the same type of scouting you are in the spring during the season, right? You're checking out the fringes and the periphery, and you're looking for sign that bedding area is active from a distance. You're not getting right in there.
I'm trying to come up the deer trails into there, really. Look at the sign coming out. So when you're going in on the outcoming trail, because when a deer goes into that bedding area, he's going to use that outgoing trail going towards it. But at some point, he's going to circle around in there or something. So his exit's not going to, his entrance isn't going to be the same as the exit, because he's going to smell the bedding area before going in there. But you're following that trail and you're looking at the sign coming out. Now, one thing I would caution against is when you get in there and you think that's where your target buck is living, and you see maybe one rub or you don't see any rubs, but you see some tracks, you see some browse, and you're like, I could do better this, and you move on. You might want to rethink that, because a lot of these mature bucks don't leave the sign that the younger ones do. And they'll walk out, there won't be no rubs, there won't be no scrapes or nothing. They'll go a distance from their bedding area. I don't know if they figure something out or whatever, but it seems like they don't make those rubs right out of bedding like the younger bucks. They're more specific to spots. So you don't really want to abandon a spot just because of sign or whatever. I mean, there's got to be some sign. You got to see the deer coming through there, but it might not be the glowing sign you expect. And a lot of the biggest bucks I've shot, I'm actually hunting them, and in some cases, I've been in a situation where I don't really think, I don't know if something's going to come out here, because you let yourself down, and that happens quite often. And that's when I shoot my biggest bucks. The biggest deer I ever shot, that giant non-typical, I crawled up to his bed and shot him. I watched that buck bed there time after time after time. I couldn't get close enough. I watched him and watched him and watched him. I picked up one of his sheds out of that bed. He bedded there so often. Whenever there's a west wind, he seemed to be there, and there's no way to get near that bed. But yet, there wasn't a scrape or a rub within 100 yards of that bed. Think about that. So if you just didn't set up on the trails because there is no big sign, in a lot of terrains, they're not leaving tracks, on hard ground.
Sure.
Sometimes you just got to throw a hunt at it and see what happens, especially if you know there's an animal in the area. If there needs to be sign. I mean, you can't just go into a big property, scout that property, find some beds and stuff, and ready to rub on that property that's of a decent buck and think you're going to shoot a decent buck. There has to be sign, but doesn't necessarily have to be where you hunt. A lot of guys are going to go through the woods, and every scrape or rub they see, they put a stand up over the top of it. And if those big bucks left that sign everywhere they walked around in daylight, they would get shot. Because, I mean, if you find a big, giant, glowing rub, look up. There's going to be a stand there, right? Almost guaranteed, or there's going to be a camera across from it. I can't tell you this year, walking around, how many times I see a big rub, and now I've got a natural instinct to look around like this. Oh, there's the camera. It's automatic, because they'll see those rubs from a long distance away. The buck I got this year, that buck I didn't even know existed, but I knew the bedding area that held big bucks, and I had scouted and looked at the trails in the springtime, and the trails looked fabulous. There weren't no rubs or anything, but they looked fabulous. And when I went in there to hunt, I'll tell you what, I was sick to my stomach. The trails looked all dried up. There wasn't a rub around anywhere. There wasn't a scrape around anywhere. The leaves had come off the trees. It was wide open. And that area was getting pounded, but not right where I was at. I set up anyways, and here that thing was bedded right where you're supposed to be, 75 yards from me. Come out, and I shot it, and it was a 170-inch buck. And lo and behold, I find out everybody out there was hunting that buck. I got messages from all kinds of people that were hunting that buck specifically because they had pictures of them and stuff around that property, but nobody was hunting that spot because it didn't look like a spot that held a big buck.
Yeah, when you were talking earlier about there didn't necessarily have to be sign right in the area you're hunting, but there had to be sign of, I was thinking of that deer specifically. I was like, yeah, just happened to you this year.
Yeah, it happens quite often, actually.
Let's talk about, and this comes up a lot, especially with guys that are newer to the beast, common mistakes. So give me 2, 3, 4, 5 of what you consider to be the most common mistakes that people make, especially in the first, 1 to 5 years of doing bed specific tactics.
The number one biggest mistake is when they find a good spot, they think they've got it made. Some of the bedding areas that you get in, and you've seen this on my videos, some of them, not all of them, but some of them will glow so big with all the rubs, scrapes, and beds and stuff. You'll think, oh my God, I got this buck. This is the most incredible sign I've ever seen. There's a tree right there. It's just like the videos show. I got it made. And you won't look much further because you think you got the spot. And what you got to realize is I know hundreds of those spots and I still struggle. It just isn't that easy. Those bucks are there for specific time frames, specific days, and you got to get everything magic to work out and be there at the right time. The biggest thing is figuring out the timing. Most people that go in do not think about the timing. When is that buck there? They don't put enough thought into why that deer is there. When is he there? What's he doing there? And at that time frame, how is he coming out of there? You got to look at each trail. A lot of new hunters go in there and they do not pick out the trees. They do not pick out the axis in there. they just really look at the beds and then wander off. And then when season comes, they come back and they're like, uh-oh, where do I go? How far do I go in? What do I got to do here? You got to have that all figured out the day you're in there. I would say, if you're new to this, maybe even jot down some notes, because sometimes you just get caught up in the moment looking at those beds and stuff that you, if you're not used to doing this, that you could forget. So, I mean, have in your notes that you find those beds, you find the trails going out, you look from the beds, how far can that buck see, smell, hear, look at the exit trails, think about why is he there, when is he there, the clues again, and then look as far as you can see and go to that spot and go another 30 yards or so and set up your stand, your spot, set up where you're going to be, how you're going to get there. Then look at your access. Find the tree first, find the bed, find the tree, then find your access back to your truck that's not going to interrupt that, in that order, in the spring scouting.
Yeah, the notes for me, the notes are real important, because as you accumulate these spots over the years, and now I hunt several different states, not every year, but 1 year one state, 1 year another state, you don't see those areas all the time. And sometimes as you start accumulating 20, 30, 50 spots, it's real easy to forget, oh, how many sticks did I want here? What was the wind? What was my access like? So a lot of times now, something you just said, once I have my tree picked out and my hunt spot, I'll usually walk a clean track on Onyx out, and that'll be the only track I use, with some variation. But if I'm only hunting that spot once or twice a year, that's the track. If I'm going to hunt it on a different wind or something, I might alter it. But especially in swampy terrain, that helped me a lot too, because you might have pretty tough access sometimes where in the daylight it's pretty clear. No, I need to go over here to get across this wet spot. But coming out in the dark, if you don't have those tracks, sometimes it gets a little hairy.
Yeah. You just mentioned something that caught my ear. You said, know how many sticks you need, know what equipment you need, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
You know how many sticks I take in when I got a 3-stick stand? Five.
Yeah.
You know how many I take when I got a 5-stick stand? 5. You know how many I take when I got a 4-stick stand? I'll give you a guess.
5. Yeah.
You know why?
Because
I
it
might
could
not end up
change.
in that tree.
Yeah. No, that is a good point.
Yeah. That brings up something else too, which is scouting your way in. I don't know if you had notes to talk about that, but when I go to a spot, if I have a spot in mind to hunt, I don't necessarily go straight to that, like follow the access trail straight line to the tree like everybody else does. I'll look at a map and I'll follow a transition line if I got the right wind for it. And I'll look at the sign going in and out of a transition, maybe where there ain't all that great of beds, but there's some, right? There's always some beds along the transition.
Sure.
And maybe some that you looked at and you're like, could hold one, but I don't know exactly, how often the bed ain't used. But you walk along that transition, you hit hot sign coming out. That something was just there recently. The rubs are tacky, the tracks are fresh. There's tracks going in and out over and over again. And you're looking in the cattails, you can see an island there down the trail, and you're like, okay, this is hot. Now, do you go to that island? No, you sit right there, right? Because that island will still be like it was, or like you imagine. You know what I mean? You haven't been there yet. You haven't burned it. You're taking a guess on that island from your scouting in spring or whatever, or from your past knowledge, right? You don't walk past hot sign. So I will make my chances a little higher by taking that route in that's a little bit off and scouting my way in. And in a lot of cases, I just don't end up where I was intending to go because of that.
Yeah, that's something I should probably implement more, because I'm admittedly guilty of doing what I said, having a pre-planned route, walking that route. And yeah, so that's something
so that
I
falls
need.
back to my being prepared for whatever I need, even though I expect less. I'm a minimalist, kind of, at least I'm accused of that. I don't know if I really am, but I don't like all kinds of stuff with me. I just want what I need, because I don't want to be fidgeting around, moving around. There's only so much you need. I need a release. I need a bow. I need some arrows. I need a stand, some sticks. And in my case, I need a camera arm and a camera, a release. I need a range finder these days. I didn't used to use one, but I do now. But that's about it. I got a bow rope. I got a little clippers in case there's a branch that's just you can't get around. But you don't. That's another thing. You do not want to cut shooting lanes in bedding areas. If you have to remove a little branch or something that's in your way, as long as it's legal where you're at, remove that branch. But do not cut shooting lanes. If you went home one day and your sofa was upside down and your kitchen chairs were turned around backwards, and you're the only one that lives there, you'd notice. A deer ain't going to come out of his bedding area one day and there's a lane cut through his trail and not notice and smell human scent in there. So even if you do that in spring, I think they notice. I mean, just think about, that's another thing too, when you talk about your no-nos. If you use trail cameras, do not put them in bedding areas. I've done it. I've done it for intel, but when you do it for hunting, you're kind of stabbing yourself in the back. Where you want those cameras is over by the feeding areas, the travel areas. You can put them on the trails coming out of bedding, but put them a little distance from the trail and put them up higher so that those deer ain't really locking on them. Because I'll tell you what, brand name doesn't matter. I've used a lot of different kinds of cameras, and I've looked at a million pictures from other people. Most people see deer in their pictures, but I would imagine the majority of people on here use cameras. Take an unbiased look at your pictures and look at how many deer, even if that camera's been there a while, are staring at the camera. You'd be surprised how many. Yeah. I got a camera in the back here on my food plot, and it's hidden fairly well. And it's been there with the same batteries since August. Been working great. It's a cell cam, so I don't ever go near it. And I got pictures today of deer just staring at the camera. So they notice things, even in spots like that, where they'll still come by because they're used to humans being there. So they'll still come through there here and there. Makes them a little nervous, but they'll come through. But there's a whole different ball game when you're screwing with the bedding area. You get into a bedding area, you put a camera in that bedding area, you cut a limb in that bedding area, they freak out. You don't want to do too much in there.
Well, Dan, two quick things, and then we'll get into some Q&A. One, I know a lot of states you can't trim or whatever, and a couple friends of mine, good tip is they take those gear ties. So if you know you can't cut limbs and you got a decent limb, you can climb up in your stand, or if you're doing it in the spring and one or two of those gear ties, you can tie a limb out of the way a lot of times to get yourself a shooting lane. So that's a good way if you want to steer clear of cutting stuff where you can't cut stuff. And then the other thing you mentioned, and this is something I'm personally interested in, was camera arm. We talked about this a while back, and allegedly there's a beast camera arm in the work. And last time I asked, you said maybe after the first of the year. What's the status on that? Any updates there?
I don't know. I haven't had a meeting, but it's due. We should be getting them in any day. We should be, there's probably going to be an email coming out soon. I mean, literally, Mario handles all of that. So it's all on him. But the last meeting we had, it was going to be after the first of the year, and I haven't heard nothing. But I know that they were being manufactured and they were supposed to be delivered. We should have them. I don't think we do yet, but they're supposed to be there, so they should be coming in any day. So, those of you that are signed up on our email list, it'll come through the email list. You'll probably see some stuff on Facebook about it. If you're not on the email list, you can easily get on it. We don't sell emails or anything like that. It's just for our own use. You just go onto the huntandbeastgear.com website and just sign up for the email list. And then any new products or anything, you get an email.
Yeah, and occasionally there's sales. I got an email not too long ago for a sale, so it's a good way to stay informed, especially in the off season if you're looking to pick up some sticks or stand at a discount. So good tip there. All right, Dan, first questions from Paul Pereira. Says, I'm a beginner hunter and recently became an American citizen, #MAGA. And hunting courses, the guys say that hunting is only a privilege and not a right. What do you think about that? It's a good question. I like that question.
Yeah, I think just about everybody does consider it a privilege. I kind of feel like it's a right. I kind of feel like that it is our right to be able to hunt and fish. Where it kind of draws the line is, if it was actually a right, we'd probably be able to just kill everything we wanted. And we can't do that. There has to be some sort of rules or something, or we'd run out of animals. We'd, some people would be greedy about it. But I do feel like it's a right, but the overall majority disagrees with me. So I kind of agree with you. And really glad to see you in our country taking on the hunting. Like to see that.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that.
Next question's from Bill. I have a friend who shot a 180-inch plus in 2005. It took 2 years to find the buck's bed. To this day, it went dead. There are other mature bucks in this area. Have you ever experienced that?
Yes, I have. I have shot deer and seen the bedding area go dead. I have shot deer and seen those areas not go dead. And I have noticed, though, that when you're talking mature bucks, which I'm sure a buck that scores 180 is mature.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, probably. I mean, some areas 3-year-olds get that big on occasion, but generally it's a mature buck. Generally it's 5-6 years old. But when you're talking deer that age, I've noticed that I'll take one out of a bedding area. I never take another one that age out of that bedding area. That's why I don't get too overly upset when people snake me and steal my hunting spots, because almost all those mature bucks, which is really what I'm really desiring and after, almost all of them come from a first sit, first spot. Not all of them, but a high majority of them. They just tend to be in that spot where nobody goes. And if somebody goes there, even if it's a couple times a year, it kind of starts generating more of the 2-year-old kind of stuff after that. And some of them just go dead. Sometimes, I think about the spot where I shot my biggest buck, that 15-pointer we were talking about earlier. That was one single bed, which is rare. Most of the time it's a lot of beds. That bedding area did hold a couple of big bucks over the years. But after that 15-pointer was shot, it seemed to die after that. It kind of just stopped getting used. But before he was shot, there were other bucks that bedded there that were sizable. Killing a deer out of a bedding area can kill the bedding area, certainly. But most of those really good bedding areas do repeat themselves year after year. But generally for really giant bucks, it's usually for the nice bucks, the 2 or 3-year-olds that come there year after year.
Yeah, and this would be something that happened over a period of time, not necessarily the following year, but yeah, and you've talked about it a lot with like the ash die off and all the invasive species now, like the buckbrush and stuff, and all the Russian autumn olive that's changed the landscape quite a bit too.
Oh yeah, it has. Just looking back, re-scouting some of my properties around here, you go into them and you look at them now, and it's just so different. The bedding has changed so dramatically from the ash die off, because literally, you'd look for ash and you'd find bucks, because the ash points that went off into these marshes were pretty much where the bucks were bedding. And all those ash are dead now, and bucks don't lay out in the open sun. They still got the high spots, but they just won't lay out in the open sun. They need that leaf cover and stuff. They like to be in the shadows. Now, they'll lay in the open sun occasionally, here and there, maybe for short periods. But a good bed should have some shade from the sun if it's a daytime bed. So that die-off really changed things. It made some of the bedding go up higher in the ground, like come up out of those points and up, to the edge of the transition to the hard ground. And a lot of times the mature bucks won't follow that. They'll just go someplace else. So yeah, that changes stuff for sure.
Jeffrey
But,
Self. Sorry, go ahead.
On the other hand, I have had spots that, I want to say close to 30 years ago I hunted. And I'll be back in that area and go back and find beds in the exact same spot still being used.
Hard to say. That's why you gotta. Yeah, that's why I got to get out there in the spring and stay active, even on the spots that have produced. Because, yeah, the only constant is change.
There are no guarantees.
Right. So Jeffrey South says, would you say deer are more consistent with how they enter or leave a bed? And would you rather hunt where they enter a bed if viable?
I would rather hunt where they exit because they are more unpredictable where they enter. So if I was hunting in the morning, I'd hunt a little further back because when they come in the morning,
sorry, Dan, real quick, he added he's in hill country in Kentucky. I want to add that detail in there.
Okay. So in hill country, they generally drop to the bottom and come up straight up to their beds and circle around and look downhill. But they do that with the wind. So they're going to shift slightly based on the wind, come around because of the wind, try to smell you coming in. So you got to be a pretty good judge of exactly where they're going to come in from before they turn and go uphill. And it's not going to be consistent. So it's harder in the morning to kill bucks on bedding. Morning hunting gets better during the rut when you're getting them using the rub lines and stuff. Now I've killed bucks going into bedding in the morning, but not near as many as in the evening. If they're bedded there in the evening, I mean, I don't care where you're at, they'll get up and they'll move 75 yards in daylight. Even during extreme gun pressure, I've had them get up and they'll move the 75 yards in daylight to kill them. But in the morning, it's a whole different ballgame how they go in there. It's just hard. And I get a lot of deer that go into their bedding areas well before daylight and lay down. And sometimes you kick them out of there. You walk into the tree and you hear them get up and run out of the bedding area. And our cameras show the same thing. Now, I did an intensive camera study on beds, and I found just exactly what my observations had told me over the years. The deer are getting in there in the morning a lot, well before daylight, bedding down. But in the evenings, they're getting up and leaving, pretty consistent. And they're going down the trails. The marked trails you see coming in and out of bedding, that's really your exit trails. So there might be multiples, but they're all exits. They're for different reasons. One might go to doe bedding, one might go to acorns, one might go to corn. So that's where that detective work comes in, and figuring out which one's for which and what timing that would be.
No, a lot of good points there and things that we've discussed, but it's always good to reiterate those. And I agree with you. Those exit trails usually and almost always are more well-defined. So a little easier to plan for setup. And I mean, we've talked about this a bunch previously on the forum too. The mornings are so tough because those bucks are almost always winding the bed, or if you're in hill country, you got dropping thermals in the morning and you got a deer coming uphill a lot of the time. So it's a tough setup in the morning.
Yeah.
Dan, the hunting factor asks, is that a Trump doll in the background?
Yes, it is. The Trump troll says hair to the chief.
Oh, that's a fancy one, the troll one. I haven't seen the troll in a while.
I don't know who sent me that. Somebody.
Here's a good question. Here's one a little more back on topic though. Brent Broughton says, in the season, Dan, how many different spots do you have targeting a specific buck? And when do you continue to hunt a buck down, and when do you move to another spot?
Well, the first part's a really hard one because it changes so much from spot to spot. I mean, sometimes you just got a little bit of the picture. Sometimes you're on a property that's smaller and that deer only beds one or two spots in that whole property, and you got to be real careful about when you go in there. And sometimes you got them on a large, major public property, and in a lot of cases, I'll know a lot of his bedding, and obviously I don't know it all, or he'd be dead. So I'm doing some guesswork. When I know of a buck in an area, I will kind of hunt that area down and put a lot of pressure on it. What am I missing here? What was the rest of the question?
When will you continue to hunt for that specific buck, and when do you move on? Okay.
So most of the time, I'm going in with precision hunts on certain winds and stuff, and I'll hunt an area down. If I really want to get a certain buck, I will put a lot of pressure on a property if I don't think I can kick them off of there. Especially with these older bucks, because they just won't kick out. The ones that are kind of like the 3-year-olds and stuff, you can push those out a little more. Older bucks seem to get real locked into their bedding. They'll stay in an area. It's hard to kick them out. But the hard part is their bedding is usually so hard to hunt that it's really hard to kill them. But I'll put pressure on an area if I think I can kill them. Sometimes I'll hop around quite a bit. I usually have about, I want to say about half a dozen to a dozen bucks I'm targeting. And I might throw a hunt here or there. Maybe I wait for a specific wind for certain bedding areas. If I start getting into fresh sign and stuff, a lot of times you'll see my focus narrow. Like a lot of times I'll go into early season, not knowing for sure what's alive. You don't know if something got hit by a car. You don't know if it got shot last season. You know, sometimes you've seen them during the summer. Maybe you got a trail camera picture. As I start getting pictures, you start getting, which I don't use very many cameras, so that doesn't happen too often. But I get a visual. I start seeing real big, high, fresh rubs where I know this buck lives. Then I start narrowing things down. I'm going to throw some hunts at areas. And if I'm not seeing the sign of that deer, after I threw a few hunts at it, you'll know if a deer is in an area based on the sign. If you cover a portion of territory and you're not seeing those big, high rubs, there's not one in there that year. And there is not big bucks on every single public property every year. There just isn't. You know, and a lot of guys will just keep hunting that same property over and over again. They need to learn to move on and give up. That you're not going to kill something if you keep hunting where there ain't no deer, or there ain't a deer of the class you want to shoot. So I'll hop around at first and get a feeling for where everything is. And then when I start seeing the sign, I start moving in for the kill. You know, that doesn't mean I'm not moving in for the kill right away, but it's a little looser. I'm going to try after some bucks that I knew about last year. And if I don't, I'm not seeing the sign, I might be abandoning certain areas, moving to others. It doesn't mean I totally abandon them. I might come back and check later. But it's kind of loose at first, and then it kind of narrows focus. And it might go from, I could be on anywhere of one of 50 different public properties to might narrow down to towards the end of September, I'm on 5.
Yeah. And then we've talked about this before too. It seems like once you have located a buck or bucks that you're interested in, you're still moving around within those areas. You're hardly ever sitting in the same tree. Might only be 50 yards or 200 yards, but then you start bouncing around that area, you know, that you've hopefully already scouted and trying to pick them off in there.
Yeah, I hunt probably, I want to say on average, between 5 and 6 times or 5 to 6 days a week. And I will do that until I tag out in Wisconsin, and then that'll drop down quite a bit. But 5 or 6 times a week. I mean, this year I tagged out in November. The year before, I don't think I shot one. I didn't tag one in Wisconsin, and I hunted into January, I think. I know I had over 100 hunts, you know, well over 100 hunts. And I think I might have hunted the same tree maybe 5 times. So it might have been 5 trees I hunted twice. Yeah, I don't hunt the same spots too often. I don't want deer to catch on to me. And I just want to move to where those deer are. And looking through past hunts, and when I had hunted trees more often, my success on mature bucks, the majority came from first sits, whether it was sightings or killings. It was from the first sits, the first time you're in the spots. So I'm always moving. So I scout a lot. As winter hits here, as hunting ends, I'm out on the foot. You know, I'm walking a lot of properties. I show some scouting videos. I don't show everything. But I'm always out there moving around, looking, learning, trying to figure out more spots. If I haven't been in a spot in a long time, I'll go back through it, relook at it. Sometimes you'll find people moved into certain areas, so you kind of scratch that off, you know, but you're always looking for more. You should always be working on that, that book of references, what you're going to do. If, you know, even if you look at a property and there isn't any big rubs or anything, but you go look at the bedding areas and stuff, you figure out how those bedding areas work. If there's old scarring and there's old big rubs, like historical ones from 5, maybe even 10 years ago, you know that it could hold big bucks. So you want to know that bed in there. You want to know the exit trails. You want to know the trees, because if one shows up there, now you know how to hunt it. So then all you have to do is move in and go nuts. So you want to learn all the public properties all the way around your where you live, as far reach as you have, so that you have a wide open playbook. If a buck shows up anywhere, you kind of know the bedding in those areas. Now, hopefully, that buck is right where you expect them. If not, then you start hunting on those transition stuff, but you kind of know the areas where he should show up.
No, all good points for sure. Aiden Outdoors, have you found a prime buck bed while winter scouting and came back in September? So any direct links from winter? I don't know if he means winter specifically versus spring or winter and spring, but how's your success?
Winter and spring is the same to me. I'm scouting now. It's harder to see them in snow, but with a good eye in certain terrains, you can find bedding in snow. I think that's not for an amateur. I think you have to get a good eye at looking at beds before you're going to know if the bucks aren't bedding there now, if it's being bedded when there's snow on the ground. But cattails is really easy. You'll see the round hole, where the cattails are pushed down and stuff. But it's much easier once the snow melts. But wintertime, yeah, I mean, pretty much, if you read the stories and you've watched the videos, most of the big bucks I've shot, I did my homework in spring and winter.
Yeah, the one, I think it was 2 years ago now or 3 years ago, that was a couple-year ordeal, and that was a early season kill, so it seems like a pretty recent and prime example there.
Yeah, that one I killed right off the bat in September, and it was because of my scouting in spring. Matter of fact, I think there was snow and ice on the ground when I found that bedding area.
So there you go. It can happen. Let's do one more, Dan. Kenny Troyer says, do bucks still bed in the marshes this late in season? We had lots of rain in the last few days in Ohio, and water levels are higher than normal. Will they bed in the hills instead of the swamps?
They probably bed in both, but swamps will trump hills if there's a lot of pressure. So they'll come down into the swamps if the pressure's high in the hills. But some bucks will bed both. Some will only bed the swamps. And I would probably want to know the beds in both. Will they bed in there now? I guess it depends on the swamps. I would say yes. A lot of times snow and ice will make bucks migrate out of swamps into higher ground, especially if it's like frozen like ice. Cattails they migrate out of a lot. If it's dogwood and tamarack and stuff, they'll live in that because there's food back in there too. But if you're talking cattail marshes, they tend to migrate out of those when the snow gets deep and the ice freezes. But there will always be some out there. There's some deer that just won't leave, won't follow the rules. But you'll see a lot less deer in those marshes when it's frozen. But swamps could be the opposite. I've had some incredible hunts in January in the middle of like tamarack swamps and stuff where there's dogwood and such. In deep snow. The hardest part is even getting out there. Trudging through 17 inches of snow is not easy.
Yeah, and I do know. I don't know the exact dates, but I do know Ohio has a later muzzleloader season. I think maybe that was like a week ago. And I think their season goes all the way up to February. So you're talking about pressure. Imagine there's still some hunting pressure out there. So it seems like if that's the case, they do seem to prefer the swamps over the hills when the pressure's on.
Yeah, you get some snow out there and stuff too. And then that dogwood and stuff, they love that. They'll be down in that crap.
All right. Well, we're running up on time. Dan will be here same time next week's 7 Central. Tuesdays. I don't know if you want to talk about, we are trying to get a guest on, but that's still TBD, I believe, right?
Yeah. Bob Folkrod said he's going to come on next week. Last time we were going to talk to him, he had a hard time with the technology, but we're just going to have him call in, which I think he can handle. And Bob is a somebody I really look up to. He's an older cat. If any of you have never seen his polar bear hunt with a bow, my God, that's the most incredible hunt there ever was. That guy is an American badass. He really is. He's really humble. So you don't hear about him a lot. But when you watch some of the hunts he does with an open mind, and you see what the stuff he goes through to get these animals, it's incredible. I think he's killed
Everything.
40 different species of North American big game animals. I think he's killed 80 species of big game animals overall. He's traveled the world hunting. He's just a cool cat. I've watched him since I was a kid when he used to be on Dan Fitzgerald videos and stuff, bow hunting deer way in the beginning of videos. He's another bow hunting icon, but just one that was always a little quieter, so not a lot of people heard about him, like, not as many as like Barry Wenzel or something, but to a lot of people in my era, Bob is a superstar.
So hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll have Bob on just like we did Barry, where he'll call in and we'll just have audio from Bob. But so if you aren't familiar with him, like Dan said, a lot of great content. And if you are, get your questions
Some
ready.
homework. Search some of his videos if you guys are bored. Watch some of the stuff on YouTube for him. I mean, I was shocked. I was on there yesterday looking through some of his stuff, and I couldn't believe how few people subscribe to him.
Yeah.
With all the stuff he's accomplished in the life and all the people he's hunted with, the famous people and stuff, and it's just amazing. I was just telling Jeremy about a video I watched last night that I'd never seen before him, where he went on a moose hunt in Alaska, and he just picked out a river to hunt on, and it was he kind of tried to figure out how long it would take to raft from one spot to a bridge in 10 days. And he had a plane land on the highway and pick him up where he left his his truck, fly him out and drop him off up at the head of this river. And he just floated down this river and shot a moose. And I mean, no contact with the world and stuff, no worries about what's going to happen. And he was, at the time, he was probably my age or older than what I am right now. I mean, that's amazing that a guy like that would just jump into those adventures like that.
Yeah, he's legit for sure. So exciting guest. Hopefully everything works out for that. And that's all I had today. Dan, anything else on your end?
I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks for everyone for tuning in, and check us out next week, 7 p.m. Central Time. Catch everybody then.